Hello, everybody. Welcome and good evening, one and all. My name is Anna Spooner, for those of you who I haven't met virtually before. And I'm delighted this evening to welcome a subject close to my heart, which is the red wines of the Loire. Before I get onto it, I'm going to do a tiny little bit of housekeeping. You must excuse me because I've been tasting the wines this afternoon already, and I've already got black teeth. So I hope some of you will be tasting along this evening and joining me in the world of black teeth. But before we kick off, first things first, we've got Mahesh behind the scenes again tonight. If you do have any techie problems, in the chat you'll find Tastings team, and Mahesh is managing the Tastings team account on the chat tonight, and you can send him any issues that you might have. But fingers crossed you can all hear me loud and clear and see me. We have got a presentation again tonight, so when I do a screen share, hopefully you'll all be able to see that as well. We've also got a Q&A as per previous sip size sessions. I know we've got a few newbies here this evening, but most of you were here last week for the intro to the Loire. But if you do want to use the Q&A to ask any questions, Mahesh is monitoring it throughout the session. I'm going to try and keep my eye on it too, so that hopefully means that I can ask questions if they're relevant as we go. John's just said, I think we ought to see Mahesh sometime. We'll arrange it, Christmas special. Now, without further ado, I'm going to kick off. But first of all, I did have to say that, and I apologise, it's not actually ironed very well, but I had to wear my Breton t-shirt tonight. I promised you all last week I would. We'll get on to why when we go into the other name of Cabernet Franc. It's a bit of a whiny joke, but I've got my Breton t-shirt on. But yes, let's kick off. As I mentioned, a lot of you were with me last week, and you will have hopefully seen, remembered, maybe you watched it on YouTube, who knows, or perhaps you already know the basic introduction to the Loire Valley. I'm not going to go over and over it again, but just to let you know, you will see this map a couple of times during this session. And as a quick reminder, if tonight we're actually going to work from the coast inland, but if we are going to talk coast, then we're going to go from the Nantes region. Oh, I forgot my cursors on the other side. Or the Nantais region, I should say, around Nantes. That's the most coastal region, majority white wine, but we've snuck in a cheeky red this evening that's from this region. Moving into the Anjou-Saumur region, and again, we're going to talk about these, but actually not cover any red wines from here tonight. We then have the Touraine region. We are going to cover wines from there this evening. Moving into this central Loire, which is where you have the Sancerres, the Puy-Fumés. We're not going to specifically taste a wine from here, but I will mention it as an aside again. And then actually worth more mentioning this week than last week, we have a section not on this map, but it's actually a section that runs down, if it's better here, and it's tiny, so you'll have to try and see it. But there are a couple of white dots in literally the middle of France. Those white dots are part of the Central Valley because the Loire River actually starts almost near the Rhone and it flows northward and out to sea. So you do actually have some vines, really decent vines, right in that middle section that's not even close enough to be on this map, and they run parallel to Beaujolais and right near Burgundy. So of course there's some good red wine produced there. You're in red wine land, and I'll pick up on that in a bit. We're not going to cover, sadly, that area, and actually it's quite hard to get wines from that part of the Loire, but we are going to just briefly mention it a little later, so I thought I'd address it on this first map initially. Quick reminder again, this is so generalized, and we're going to talk a little more about some nuances and certainly the other grape varieties that you can't see here, but it's worth saying there are some general, more popular or common grapes in the different regions. Now you'll notice Melon de Bourgogne, the white grape by itself in the Nantais region. We're about to disprove that in just a moment with our first wine. But then we start to get into Cabernet Franc land, moving in up to Gamay and Cabernet Franc, amongst others. I should always say amongst others, and then getting into a bit of Pinot Noir territory, but it's worth saying that One of the beauties and the curses of the Loire Valley that you'll probably see as we get into it is that there are red grapes of all different styles grown all the way through the Loire Valley. It makes it unbearably confusing for a consumer to know exactly what they're getting in the bottle. But it also means that the variety, as I mentioned last week, I really don't think there is an area of France or an appellation system with variety like this. So a quick reminder of the grapes and the top grapes of the Loire, the red grapes, I should say, and this is by production of grape rather than wine, but much of the same muchness. Cabernet Franc is our top star, should we say. We're going to visit that on wine too if you're tasting along with me tonight. But if you just have a Cab Franc to hand and that happens to be what you're drinking, you're in good company, because over half of the red wine produced in grapes grown in the Loire is Cab Franc. Second is Gamay. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Sadly, don't have one, but it's really important. 18% Gamay. We've then got Pinot, which is 8%. We are going to talk about that one in a moment. We've got grolleau at 7%. We're going to mention that too. Cabernet Sauvignon, that'll get a shout out at 5%. And then divers, which is sort of French for other, or various actually probably. And we do have some various that we'll go into in just a second. But let's start with Gamay, our 18%. So it's not a small amount, it's a decent amount grown. I'm going to stop the share quickly. Actually, no, let's stop the share. That'd be nicer. I'll stop the share whilst I talk to you about grape varieties. Oh, if I can. Why won't you let me? It's not letting me. Stop share. There we go. So let's talk about some grapes that aren't the ones that we're tasting today. Let's do a quick background on those and then we're going to jump into the Pinot Noir. If you are thirsty, immediately start. Don't ever wait for me. I've been tasting already. But let's kick off with Gamay because it is the 18% production and it's one we're not tasting, so it's really worth giving it some airtime up front. I mentioned on the map that there is that sort of strip that grows parallel to Beaujolais. Now Gamay from that area, from the Upper Loire, is actually an incredibly similar style to Beaujolais. And Beaujolais produced, for those who don't know, Beaujolais is made with the grape Gamay. So we're going to find two scenes down France that produce it. Get Beaujolais, very, very well known, and then this Loire Valley is just slightly north of there, but it really is running along a similar scene. Fruity, enjoyable, sort of early drinking styles of wine. Now, the other place that produces a decent amount is Touraine, as I showed you on that map at the beginning. And those reds are less fruity, the reds from Gamay. Probably, and I'm going to really generalize, less popular for our British palate. We're just not used to a really austere style of Gamay like that. There's less fruit in it, but makes some great Loire rosé, sorry. So Gamay can be great for productions of things like Rosé de Loire, Rosé d'Anjou, which is obviously just along in the Anjou region. There's actually a whole appellation within Anjou that's called Anjou Gamay. So if you do love Gamay and you want to explore, look around for Anjou Gamay, but also in the Anjou and specifically Touraine region, you're going to find some good Gamay. If you can get hold of some, try and find that Upper Loire stuff as well. Really broad brushing, but Gamay likes granite. So if you limestone soils are Cabernet Franc's friend. We're going to learn about that in a bit, but granite is not really so much, and granite and Gamay go together. It's easy to remember, G and G. So if you know that there's a particular producer that has good granite soils, or maybe you read about granite on the back of the label, then those Gamay wines are going to be particularly good. Let's move on to Cabernet Sauvignon. It wasn't a huge amount, 5% production. It is a variety from Bordeaux, works well in the schist soils. It is the child of Cabernet Franc, the most popular grape of the Loire, but it ripens later, about a week later. So you need a bit of an Indian summer in the Loire to get it to its full ripeness. But it goes into rosés, and rosés great because you can pick a little earlier. You don't need to get those full tannins, the full structure sort of ready. You know, you don't have to have the tannins fully developed by the time you pick it if you're producing a rosé. That's not what you're looking for. So Cabernet d'Anjou, Samour Rosé, Rosé d'Anjou, Rosé de Loire, all of those are likely to have some Cabernet Sauvignon in. And you can find a little bit in blends, but less so. Only 2 more left before we taste the first wine, and these are the 2 native grapes of the Loire. One was already mentioned on the slide, grolleau. That is native to Touraine in particular, and it's good for the off-dry rosés. So they use a lot of it in those. I mentioned them already, the off-dry ones last week. In red wines, you do find it, but not really in the named appellation wines. You're more likely to find it in Anjou rouge, for example. And then there is another grape variety that its name always, the pronunciation always gets me. So I apologize in advance. It's Pinot, but not spelt like Pinot Noir so Pinot de Pinot de Onis, without the S. You kind of imagine it with the S. It's not there. Pinot de Onis. They sometimes in the Loire call it Chenin Noir. Not related at all to Chenin Blanc, but it just gets called that sometimes. And you find that in the PGI wines, the rosés used to be very popular, but people are ripping it up now and replacing it with Cab Franc. So that would have come in our various regions. But let's talk about our first wine. Now, I mentioned this one's going to be an interesting one because Pinot Noir doesn't normally grow here. We've got, if you're tasting along with me, the Famille Vouvray Pinot Noir. It's a lovely big print label there. Don't worry, I'll show you the bottle shot in a minute as well. But Pinot Noir is native to Burgundy. It's not a traditional Loire grape. When it is produced in the Loire, it's normally produced, and I'm just going to show you a sort of rubbish wiggle of the map here, but it's usually produced to the Touraine region and to the east. So I mentioned Sancerre red earlier, or Sancerre. Sancerre rouge is made with Pinot Noir. Normally, this easterly part is warm enough to get the Pinot Noir a little happier. However, this Pinot Noir is actually happy here in the Nantes, the west of the normal growing region for Pinot. What I would say is that it's because of that and because of where it's grown, don't expect it to be like a Burgundy. You can just imagine the temperature difference. Burgundy is very, very different in climate, but some of those wines that I mentioned down that strip near Beaujolais can actually produce some incredible Pinot Noir. Red Sancerre, when it's made well, absolutely incredible. It might not win the battle, but it certainly puts up a good fight against some wines from Burgundy. So if you can find a slightly more expensive, concentrated, maybe slightly aged Pinot Noir from the Loire, I do recommend it as a comparison. But put that comparison away from your mind. That's not what we've got here. It's a very different style of Pinot that we have here, and a really pleasant one. What I would say is you could have chilled this. I don't like chilling this particular one. I've tried it a couple of times. It's fine in the summer when it's going to be warm outside, but I think with this particular wine, chilling it too hard loses a bit of its aromas. So I'm happy with this at room temperature, actually. Look at the price, $6.95. That's not Pinot Noir prices. But this is a great, Toby Morale often says that, when you produce Burgundy in sort of larger, Pinot Noir, but red Burgundy in larger quantities, that the structure falls off, but they're not producing a wine here that's designed to be lain in your cellar for 10 years. We're producing a wine that is young, drink it young, what's Joe said, till 2022, drink it young, chill it if you want to chill it, don't chill it, have it with a barbecue, have it as an aperitif. It's definitely a different style. And as I said, it's made in the Nantes region. It's actually produced, Vouvray family are heavenly. I'm going to show you a quick picture. This is Nicolas on the left, and his father, I think it's his father actually, I never actually asked that question. But it's the 5th generation of the Vouvray family producing wine in the Loire. They produce wines that are, sorry, I'm just going to stop my share again. Where am I? Maybe not. There we go. They produce wines that are hugely varied. So if you go onto the Vouvray website, it's huge. And that is because they've got this particular place. So this is in the Cave de Nantes. In particular, it's based around an appellation area called Palais. which is actually a sub-region of Muscadet, so they do produce some very nice white wines here as well. But they've also got other different places throughout. I think they've got maybe 6 or 7 facilities, and that's because they are a family-owned négociant, so they buy grapes in, and they've been running since 1885. Négociants are very, very common in France. Pardon me. We'll have another négociant on wine 3 as well. And it's quite common because you've got lots of different styles of grapes. You can produce lots of different kinds of wine. They have about 100 hectares total around the Nantes region, up through Anjou and right inland to Touraine as well. So, you know, they've got loads of colours to play with, loads of styles to play with. It's a really exciting and dynamic company. So if you have ever come to a Loire tasting with the Wine Society where we've brought growers, you've probably met Nicolas because he's often nipping over to help host tastings for us. So really lovely family, very hands-on. And in terms of the way this is produced, it's just 6 months in stainless steel. It's a really classic light maceration, so about 15 days on the skin, something thereabouts. You know, we're not talking about loads of oak aging. We're not talking about stems and oak and cold soaks and post soaks. We're just talking about a really lovely classic style of wine. Now, I've got 2 questions that I'll quickly touch on before we move on. I've got, first of all, how do Anjou Gamay compare price versus quality with Beaujolais? Because of those, well, there's a few things. They tend to be more austere, so they don't always produce. Beaujolais is very famous for using a particular style of winemaking called semi-carbonic maceration. But in order to produce that, you do need to have quite ripe stems, because the stems are going in with the whole bunches are going in. So you need to have a lot of ripeness. In Anjou, they don't have quite as much ripeness, so they might not be using, some places do, but they might not be using that particular method. What gives Beaujolais its sort of special character with that semi-carbonic maceration is this overt fruitiness, almost like kirsch and berries all round. You might find less of that in Anjou. So in the Anjou styles, going to be much more austere and less fruity. Yeah, that's probably the easiest way to describe it. But of course, that, you know, there are exceptions to all rules, and a warm, decent Anjou Gamay might taste like a Moulin à Vent with all that granite. So who knows? And a second question is, why are they allowed to name their grape on the label? Actually, I don't know whether you spotted, it's a Vin de France. So this, whilst it's produced in the Nantes region, it's not actually an appellation wine. So it's just you can call it Pinot Noir because it's Vin de France. So that is the way that that's the way they get away with it. I find it quite helpful because it means you know what you're drinking. Now, we've had a member say that there's a slight echo. Will you just let me know if that's continuing? I'm going to try something really quickly. I'm not sure whether it is the source of the issue, but I've got my presentation screen up. So I'm just going to really quickly, hopefully that might have helped. But please do write in the chat if there's still a little bit of an echo, and I will try some other jiggery pokery to try and solve it. Okay, so oh, still an echo. Okay, I'm going to mute myself and then I'm going to come back on. I'll be one tick. Sometimes that helps. And the other thing I can do is I can change my microphone to webcam. Has that helped? Let's see. Better. Okay, there we go. I've changed to a different microphone. Wonderful. Good stuff. So let's move on to the much better. Good. Lovely. Let's move on to the next wine. And what we're going to do here is we're going to move inland. So oh, I didn't even taste it with you. Sorry, I got distracted by the echo. Hopefully, if you are tasting along, it should be sort of cherries, freshness, definitely pure fruit. You're not really getting much else. Tiny bit of a slightly herbal thing, but for me, loads and loads of raspberries, cherries, all of those sorts of things. And then in terms of structure, it's kind of everything you want from a young, easy drinking Pinot Noir, in my opinion, and definitely one under £7. It's fruity, it's got good acid, it's mouth-watery. You can see why I suggested maybe you'd chill it in the summer, because it has got that freshness and that lightness. Tiny touch of tannins, but really it's not about the tannins in this wine, it's about the brightness, the fruitiness, the freshness. Definitely drink it young, don't leave it around, as Joe Locke said. Drink it young, enjoy it. If you were to buy it now, I would drink it, it's probably spring. And then well, it's a perfect wine for spring, actually, isn't it? When you're not sure whether to get a red wine or a white wine out, get a lovely Pinot Noir from the Nantes region in the Loire. How niche. Right, let's move on. I'm going to share my screen again. And sorry, Nicola, bye-bye. But what we're going to do is we're going to move into Cabernet Franc country. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that there's Cabernet Franc in the Anjou-Saumur and the Touraine regions in particular. That is true. But I would say in particular, the quality area is here and it straddles both. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But to give you background on the Cabernet Franc grape variety, it is actually, I mentioned this in last week's session, it's actually not native to the Loire technically. It's been grown here for many centuries, and they believe that a gentleman called Cardinal Richelieu brought it up because he was a cardinal working for the church, and he was working around the Anjou region, and he had tasted the grape before and liked it. So he actually, supposedly, history books say, transported it up. They think from Bordeaux or further south. So it could be Bordeaux, but actually general consensus is it's probably more like the Basque country. So over the border from Spain, or over the border into Spain, I should say. Bonus point for Cabernet Franc is that it ripens 1 week earlier than Cabernet Sauvignon. So where Cabernet Sauvignon struggles to ripen, I mentioned, this grape can get to full ripeness. However, historically only in good years. So it used to be that you had to have a very warm year to get a kind of rich Cabernet Franc, and often they were leaning towards the greener side, and it put a lot of people off. So it was sort of herby but stalky and green, and one of the characteristics of Cabernet Franc in particular is green bell peppers. And I wonder if you're tasting along now, have a smell. Even in warm climates, you can still get green bell peppers on Cabernet Franc. It's just one of its little niche signifying factors. But you hope that that's going to be complemented with some red fruit, and then in warmer climates, blacker fruit. But historically, sometimes that fruit wasn't even being allowed to develop, and the tannins were austere. Luckily, not so much anymore. Better winemaking practices, so things have come along since the 80s. Better winemaking practices, and I mentioned last week, climate change as well, has meant that actually Cabernet Franc can ripen perfectly. And the best area, as I mentioned, is this little spot here. One of the things that's great about these areas is they have a soil called tuffeau. And if you've ever seen the beautiful white chateau of the Loire, they're made from the tuffeau limestone. And tuffeau is particularly good in these areas because Cabernet Franc doesn't like to have water stress. And so this soil is really great for absorbing. This limestone takes in the water when it rains and then slowly seeps it out when the vines need it. So it's a really, really good soil type. You can make sparkling wines from Cab Franc in this area. Samu rosé is made from Cab Franc. But the most famous, and I don't mean to be negative here, but one of the most famous regions here is, you can see Saumur Champagny, just coming down into here in the Saumur region. Saumur Champagny is a very good wine, but Jancis Robinson calls it, and I'm going to have to read this out, the Loire's most fashionable and therefore often overpriced Cabernet Franc based red. Now, I'm not sure I necessarily agree with her on all of that. I think it depends on the producer, doesn't it? But there is definitely a general consensus that those wines are more expensive and perhaps not justifiably so. It's very trendy. There's a lot of organics going on there as well, all sorts of things. But in principle, you don't have to buy the slightly more expensive reds from Semur Champagny. What you can do is hop, skip and jump over with me to Chinon, its neighbour, that I'm going to mention quickly now, and we tasted one last week, and then also the other two appellations in the Touraine area, Bourgogne and Saint-Nicolas de Bourgogne. I would call those the three hero appellations of Cabernet Franc in the Touraine, and probably Cabernet Franc overall. So if we're talking about, this is the sort of area we're talking about here. This actually is exactly where the next producer is, but you can see we've shifted inland. Chinon is the largest. So if I just go back one, Chinon, this section here is the largest, and the slopes face north. They're on the south side of the river. So it can be harder to get the grapes in Chinon ripe. Historically, it was even harder. Now it's getting better, but you might find that the Chinon wines can be slightly greener than the northern counterparts, the Bourgogne and Saint-Nicolas de Bourgogne. You're allowed to put Cabernet Sauvignon in, but as I mentioned at the beginning, ripens later, probably wouldn't. Mainly it's 100% Cabernet Franc. What's really nice about Chinon, though, is those limestone soils are actually all round the slopes. So you've got right by the riverbed some gravel and pebbles and clay and all the things you'd expect by river, sand, but then literally the slopes come up as limestone, and the plateau is a rocky bed over limestone. So loads of gorgeous limestone in Chinon. Bourgogne, slightly smaller, and that's that northern appellation, smaller, 1,500 hectares, but south-facing. And because of that, the grapes reach optimum ripeness. So the Bourgogne wines, if we're comparing that holy trinity I mentioned, the Bourgogne wines tend to be the strongest, the richest, the beefiest, the biggest, sometimes more alcohol, but more than anything, just big present fruit. Again, Cabernet Sauvignon can be blended, but you're more likely to find just straight up Cab Franc. And again, plenty of those tuffeau soils. So we're loving the Bourgogne. And then within Bourgogne, smaller appellation, it sort of was part of Bourgogne, but I don't want to call it a satellite because it's not, it's a zone in its own right. They managed to, well, there is a different type of soil here. I'll skip through quickly because I like this this is a closer example, should we say. So you've got the Bourgogne here, and then the Saint-Nicolas de Bourgogne, obviously showing that it is smaller. But what I will show you quickly before we taste, because I'm conscious we want to taste, I love this. There's a really, really good website. The Saint-Nicolas de Bourgogne winemakers have got together to produce a really decent wine website that's not only educational, but it's got some lovely creative things on it. And what's quite different here compared to Bourgogne that actually makes a huge difference is on, here's the river, lovely. Then we have silty gravel. Then we have the town, which is gorgeous. Up sandy and gravelly, and the tuffeau is at the top. Now with Bourgogne, the tuffeau was far more spread. Because of these silty gravels and sands, actually what happens here is Saint-Nicolas de Bourgogne wines are lighter. So they're a lighter expression of the Cabernet Franc grape variety. So that's the way that you would differentiate. So if you want something a little lighter in style, then Saint-Nicolas de Bourgogne is going to be your best bet. There's the village. So this is looking down. Again, a picture I nicked from their website. So thank you to them. But it is, I'll include it in my email tomorrow because it really is fabulous. So let's have a taste of it. And I'll just check the chat whilst we're tasting. But this is a particularly, I apologize that it says image not available. It is a new wine. It's just gone up. But I also want to mention that it says Joël Talou as the producer. There's actually, that is correct. Clarisse and Joël started the winery in the 70s, but since then, in 1993, their daughter Veronique and her husband Thierry, I'm not going to be able to say this either, Folzenlogel, they joined. So the actual winery now is called Joël Toral Thierry Folzenlogel, and I've probably pronounced that wrong, but you get the gist. So obviously that full name is not included, but what's really nice is it's a relatively new producer, only 2 generations, and in France that's new, but it's a really lovely family affair, and they own about 30 hectares. So they actually own a pretty decent whack. Started with just 2 and have grown it over the course of those 2 generations. How is this produced? Well, it's hand-picked from 20-year-old vines. It is, those vines are on mostly those south-facing slopes, so we do get a nice bit of richness, but it will be on the slopey material rather than up at the top. And it's aged in 600-litre wooden barrels. Now, what that means is you're not going to get the oak age necessarily, sorry, the flavors of oak aging, but what you will get is the oak has really nicely softened probably some of the tannins. But really with a 600-litre barrel, you're not looking for huge changes in the wine. The surface area of wine touching the oak of the barrel is much less than if you were, say, in a 200-litre. So let's give it a go. Oh yeah, for me it's got that lovely herbaceous thing that we were really hoping to get, but it's got also those berry fruits. So I've got the herbs, I've definitely got the bell pepper. I'm also getting something a bit graphite-y or pencil shaving-y. I'm getting a kind of red currant, red berry, black currant flavor as well. So it was obviously warm. 2019 was a warm year, so that explains why we're getting black fruits as well as red fruits. Yeah, lovely. Let's give it a taste and then we'll well, I'd like to see what you think as well. I've got the chat up on this screen here, so please do let me know. So I dribbled with excitement. I love Cabernet Franc, and it can be in a bit of acquired taste. I think once you catch the Cabernet bug, I think it's nearly impossible to turn back from Cabernet Franc. I mentioned on the call last week, and I've mentioned before, my father has always said he doesn't like Cab Franc from the Loire, and I've slowly been changing his opinion on that whilst I can. The person who really changed my opinion was Sarah Knowles, our buyer for Champagne. She very kindly took me on a trip to Champagne. You're going to be confused about where the story's going. It's fine. And as we were coming back to get the Eurostar in Lille, we had time to grab lunch. And she said, let's go for steak frites. And we sit down, and without question, the first wine she ordered was a Loire Cab Franc. And it kind of lives and breathes bistro culture, food and wine matching. The acidity means that it can go really well with loads of foods. It can be a real crowd pleaser wine to pair with an incredible variety of foods. But it's also not too fruity and jammy. It's got that savouriness. It's got that backbone of a bit of tannin, but not too much. So I would implore you, if you're going, I'm not sure you've convinced me on a Cabernet Franc yet, please, please, please try it with food. Because after that one sitting with Sarah, I thought, I've been eating steak with the wrong wine. You know, we weren't talking a chewy steak. We were talking a sort of flat griddle, little bistro number, not a big hearty Malbec and a rump. You know, it was a flat, it was with some frite, a bit of ketchup, and even in ketchup with the acidity and the vinegar could still work with the Cab Franc. So yeah, I love Cab Franc, and I do think it's a shame that it gets a bad rep, but it's found all over the world now. And I think the nice thing is lots of producers are kind of seeing what happens. I mentioned it with Chinon, seeing what happens in places like South Africa, Australia, California, and they're producing a slightly different style now, less austere, better winemaking, better vineyard practices, you name it. Cabernet Franc's seeing the return. I think there was even an article in a national newspaper this summer, you know, is Cabernet Franc, has it found its second wind, as it were? I'm sure the language was better than that, but yeah, it's having a revival of sorts. Right, I'm conscious I'll go on to the next bit, and then we'll go back to questions, if that's all right, because what I don't want to do is rush the final wine. That's always my pet hate. So we'll come back to any questions, because I have seen a few pop up in the chat. So what we're going to do now is we're going to zoom out, because interestingly, I have picked another wine from the Touraine region, but it's a fun grape variety. So this is technically a Touraine rouge, so from the whole region, as opposed to jumping into the small appellation of Saint Nicolas de Bourgogne. It's actually, Touraine wines actually aren't made in this sort of vast area as you imagine it. There are 104 little communes, but it's actually only 5,500 hectares. So if we go back to Saint-Nicolas de Bourgail, that was 1,000 hectares. So actually the places that can produce Touraine rouge, it's not vast. It's not like sort of Bordeaux AOC where it can seemingly seems like it can come from anywhere. But the Touraine, in fact, I think the second map is better. Let me, yes, it is, wonderful. So it's these green bits. These light green colours are AOC Touraine. And basically what it means is that if you're in Saint-Nicolas de Bourgail, you have to make Saint-Nicolas de Bourgail, even though you are technically Touraine. But as you can see, the Touraine area is far more spread out. So you're going to get a little bit more variety in your soils. And lo and behold, what does that mean? If you've got variety in soils, you're probably going to have variety in grapes. And you do. For reds and even rosés and whites, there is a huge variety of grapes that can go into your Touraine rouge. And it means that Touraine wines can probably be some of the most confusing in the Loire. Gamay is technically the most common grape, you remember from our little slide at the beginning. However, you also find Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, Caux, which is Malbec that we're going to go on to, the local name for Malbec, Caux, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, which is a grape you more commonly find in Champagne, Pinot Gris for the rosé, and then those grapes I mentioned at the beginning, Pinot d'Aunis and grolleau. So all of those varied soils, all of those grape varieties, that's just for reds and rosés, the ones I've told you. There's a lot going on. So what I thought we'd do is I thought it would be fun to focus on Malbec, and the reason, or Caux as it's known. And the reason I thought it would be fun is that Touraine has proved a really ideal area for growing this grape variety, especially in the valleys of the Cher. And there's a spot called Mont-Louis that's kind of the edge of where it's decently grown. Okay, we've seen climate change and temperature warmings have helped Cabernet Franc. Undoubtedly, they're also helping the Caux grape variety or the Malbec grape variety too. Less likely to find 100%, although certainly not uncommon, but you often do find it has a blending partner. It is often blended with Cabernet Franc, as this one is, I think 10%. Don't hold me to that. I hope so. Doesn't say. I think it's 10% Cabernet Franc that supports this. But you also get Gamay, so the Beaujolais grape variety. And in terms of what should we expect from Caux, and why is it different to Argentinian Caux or Malbec? It's much more perfumed, and it's less kind of overtly chocolatey and rich and ripe fruits, should I say. It will be slightly underripe in terms of the fruit, but Mahesh does get to taste. For whoever asked that earlier, Mahesh and I were chatting because he's got this wine in particular this evening, and it is still really, really fruity. So you have to expect, that comes from the Malbec, but it has got, for me, more perfume, that freshness and that pepperiness that sometimes you might not get with Malbecs from the New World. Yeah, blueberry, black fruits. I think if you haven't had this open for a while, I'd encourage you to leave some in the glass and come back to it, because it was much better. It's got much better, sorry, I should say, since I've had it in the glass. It's a beautiful purple color as well, which I think is mentioned on one of the tasting notes I read, but I really spotted it, and it's got that gorgeous Malbec purple. And in terms of where this is from, another négociant. So I mentioned négociants up in Wine 1, i.e. people that buy grapes. That role has slightly changed now. There's often sort of MW or WSET questions about the role of the négociant. Traditionally, they used to buy grapes that weren't made into wine, produce wine with somebody and then sell it, or they'd buy the wine bottled and sell it. Everything's slightly blurred now, and négociants are doing winemaker jobs, winemakers are doing négociant jobs. If we leave that aside, what's interesting particularly about this company is they're doing a bit more of a new world approach. So they work with lots and lots of growers all over, similar to the Bourguiers at the beginning, but they've got terrain wines, but they've also got Crémant de Loire, so sparkling wines, Sancerre, you name it. And basically, they buy the grapes in, and it's a husband and wife duo. And then the wife, Fabienne, produces the wines. So she is actually in charge of winemaking. So they get all these grapes in, and she actually looks after the wines. And her husband, Philippe, is in charge of sales. And they're based in the heart of Touraine. So really exciting venture. We have, I believe, Mahesh, you probably can hold me to this, but I think we've sold their Sauvignon Blanc before. But I actually did this wine in a private tasting once and loved doing it, because it shows people that Malbec isn't just an Argentinian, you know, it's not, yes, que Argentina has made it famous, but Cor, as it's properly known, originally from Bordeaux, and loves that west coast of France. It just doesn't like the cold, so we need to make sure it stays warm. No frosts, please, for the old Cor or the Malbec. But again, it comes down to those better winemaking practices, yada yada yada. As long as it doesn't get frosted, then Malbec's very happy in this part of the world. So we've done the smells. Let's have a quick taste. As I said, don't imagine you're going to get a Malbec in an Argentinian Malbec style. Treat it a little bit like the middle wine if you're tasting a long wine too, because there's a bit of that Cab Franc in there. Lovely. It's fruitier than the last wine for me, and it's it's fruitier. It's more peppery, black pepper. It is also more tannic. So I'm feeling that mouth coating now far more than I was on the Cab Franc. It's probably got a little bit warmer, being slightly more inland and further away from the maritime climate of the middle wine as well. It's got a lovely length to it, and I think great for the price. I'm just going to quickly check the price again. Oh, I'm not. We saw it. It was under £10. But it's really, really sort of fruity, fun. I think a fabulous midweek wine, particularly in these colder months where you want something perhaps with I don't want to say slightly more alcohol. It is more than the others, 13.5, but it's got more warmth to it. So for me, this is kind of a perfect when the winter starts to get in wine. So I'd be keen to £8.95. Thank you, Paul. There we go. I'd be keen to know what you all think. Please just pop it into the chat. Oh, I've been corrected. It's 20% Cab Franc as well, not 10%. I apologize. I think you can taste that. I think you can really taste that kind of green touch to it as well. One thing you get from Cor, I think if it's been open a little longer, is sometimes you can get a kind of Malbec. It's sometimes a kind of floral thing. And I think for me, there is a touch of floral, but it comes with the stalky stuff. And the stalky stuff is quite possibly the Cabernet Franc. Right, a good question to start with. None of these wines are tanniny. That's tanniny. Basic question, but why not? It's a good question. It's not a basic question. There's a few reasons. One is that if your grapes aren't sort of, there's several reasons, but if your grapes aren't very, very ripe, then your tannins won't necessarily be overly ripe as well. So you might not want to extract too much. So you might not want to allow the tannins to be leached from the skins whilst you've got the juices mixed together with them, because they might not have the best flavor compared to, say, a very, very warm Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa. However, the other argument is that it's actually just this style of winemaking. So one of the things the Loire prides itself in its reds is acidity. And that's really the main thing you're looking for in a Loire red. You're not looking for this kind of like overly filling residual sugar sweetness or big tannins. You're looking for freshness and acidity. And so that's what people come to expect from this part of the world. And therefore, winemakers are producing wines in this style. So for me, that there will be some things limiting big tannins, the other being grape varieties. Cabernet Franc, for example, does not have as juicy, it's not really the right word, but as plump and plush tannins as Cabernet Sauvignon. It is finer grain and less obvious, should we say. But I think as the world moves away from these big, expressive, dominating wines, I think we might fall back somewhere like the Loire, because it's kind of, yeah, you don't have to be punched over the face with the wine from the Loire. They're subtle, they're discreet, they're ridiculously good value. So it's a combination of factors that will not let them have big tannins, but also winemaking choices and a style of wine that is more historically Loire. Another quick question. I'm conscious we've hit the buzzer already, but another quick question. Are the bottle shapes in the Loire determined by the level of sediment in the wine? I'm going to suggest no, but I actually don't know the answer to that. I can take a few guesses at why certain wines are put into certain bottle types. I think probably something like the Val de Loire, i.e. no regulations. They will have put this in what is literally a Burgundy bottle with these lovely, a lovely Burgundian style bottle. And that will be to tell the consumer when they pick it off the shelf, this is a Pinot Noir. Now, you'll find all of the wines tonight are Burgundian in style. I don't know the answer. I'm really interested though. I'm going to find out now, but I wonder whether it's leaning towards that these are lighter style wines. If you were to put, for example, your Malbec or your Co, if you were to put that in a shouldered bottle, so the sort of bottle that you get a Bordeaux in, or New World Malbec, often in that style bottle, you're kind of suggesting to the consumer, that that's what to expect. And you find a lot of wine producers, if there's not a regulation, loads of AOCs have regulations, so the regulation history I don't know, but you might find if they do not have regulations that they're choosing to give you some brainwaves and tell you what style of wine's inside. Quick question about French still chilling their wine from this area, and how do I feel about it? I feel very good about it. Yes, the French do chill their wine still, and with the right wines, that's absolutely fine. Don't chill everything. Big tannins don't suit chilling. So going back to the tannins question, you can really ruin a tannic wine by chilling it. They go horrible. But wines with high acidity that have this sort of lightness and freshness, they often do really work well chilled. So yes. And like I said right at the beginning, don't feel like you have to chill a wine just because it says chill it. If you don't feel like you want to, that's really not a problem, especially with these styles of wine. But I would definitely chill at least the Pinot if you want to experiment. I would probably also chill the Cabernet Franc, and the Malbec you could, or the Co, you could, but I'd probably say the one I'd chill the least. If it was the summer, then yeah, go for it. Chill all of them because they'll warm up in the glass, and you definitely don't want any of these wines warm. Last question, really quick one. AOP and AOC, what's the difference? AOC stands for Appellation d'origine contrôlée, so controlled appellation, and AOP stands for Appellation d'origine protégée, so protected. There are some really not very interesting, very minor differences, but AOC is the one we tend to use now, and that's the sort of regulated one by the INAO. It's my dyslexia coming through there. So yes, they're much of the same muchness. They work in the same way. Ignore them, doesn't really matter. Yeah. Right. That was a bit of a whistle stop again, but hopefully we covered three of, I think, the most important grapes. If I could have picked a fourth, I will be honest, it would have been Gamay, because I think that's a really exciting thing in the Loire Valley. But if we'd had Gamay in there, I would say those four particular grapes are the ones to watch in the Loire. I think look out for all of them. There's a place for all of them, but for me in particular, the two to shout about, because they're poorly represented generally in France, but getting better and certainly riding on the coattails of the success in the New World, are the Cabernet Franc and the Co. I think those two are the two for me that if you're going to buy wines from the Loire, they would be, I know they're not even originally from the Loire, but they have lived there for many centuries, and the winemaking around those wines is so traditional and lovely, and they are, as I said, poorly represented elsewhere in France, and the Loire is a beautiful home for them. So I hope you enjoyed. Sorry, we had loads of questions tonight and I didn't get through I don't think I even got through half of them. So I'm so sorry. Please feel free to email them through if you really have got the burning desire to have them answered. Email me them and I'll pick them up tomorrow. I'd be more than happy to. I'll send you an email tomorrow. As always, the slides are available, and I will include in the follow-up email some links to those lovely resources that I think are great for exploring the red wines of the Loire. Have fun. If you've got some steak frites for dinner, lucky you. I don't. I've got spicy chicken wings, which I'm going to take the Pinot with because I think that will be the best option. But have a lovely evening, one and all. I hope to see you again soon. We've got Intro to Bordeaux next week, so we will talk a little bit of Cabernet Franc, but probably not as much as we did tonight. But it'll be a great session if you decided you quite wanted to see where else Cabernet Franc has a fun time. Bordeaux, where it's very important and very underrepresented. So yes, I hope to see you then. Thanks again to Mahesh behind the scenes, and thank you all for coming. Cheers.